Hello, my name is Timon Smektawa. I am the lead game designer at Techland, working at Dying Light to Stay Human.
So, Timon, can talk about what the launch had been like for this game, because this game had a really long, complicated development process, and you finally got it out. What was it like to finally get your game out to the public?
It was like an amazing moment of release. We released all of the tension, all of the emotions, all of the anticipation that we have built over those 5 years. We were extremely emotional during the last few weeks before the release. I think the hardest was like the last 2 weeks when we stopped working already on day one patch, and we could just like basically sit by our desks waiting for the game to be released. There wasn't really much we could meaningfully do over those 2 weeks, like end of January and the first week of February. So it was just us basically waiting for the thing to drop. And I think the fact that it dropped and the fact that over the first weekend the game reached more than 3 million players, this was really a very happy time for us, a very, very happy moment for the whole studio. We felt accomplishment. We felt like we were proud, and we are still proud of what we have managed to achieve. The only thing is that now we realize that the beast is out, and we have promised like a lot of support for the game. So after like a very, very short moment of release, and I think everyone at the studio went for holidays, shorter or longer, but everyone had that time to kind of regenerate a little. But now it's back to business. Now we are back to working on the game, and so like thankfully the game is still received very well. We still get a lot of praise from gamers. So this gives us fuel to keep the momentum going and to keep working on the game.
Can you kind of take us through your mindset or just your studio's environment when you did release it? Because I know, nowadays, it's not like back 20, 30 years ago where you released the game on disc and that was it. Like that was the final product. You couldn't do anything. Now you can patch a game once a week, or if you're on Steam, as much as you want. What went through your studio's like kind of environment when you announced it, when you had 3 million people playing a game as opposed to a few hundred?
Like as I said, it was like maybe I miss English words to describe it, but it was just general happiness. It was just like general feeling of accomplishment. And actually, when you started asking the question, I think you will take the question in a different direction, and because it's different than it was before. Because right now, you work on a game is never finished, especially when you make commitments as we do. We understand that it's kind of easy to build the initial hype, and it's kind of easy to get, maybe not that easy, but like it's easier to get the numbers on the first weekend, on the second weekend, but it's much harder to keep the snowball rolling. It's much harder to actually keep players' interest, make them stay with the game, and keep them engaged with the content that you have in the game and that you are adding to the game as the weeks, months, and years progress. I think we have built quite a unique model for a game with Dying Light 1, where you drop a AAA, huge open world game and then support it almost like it's like a free-to-play game or a game as a service type of thing. And we did that with the first game, and it worked very well for our studio. And I think it allowed us to build an amazing relationship with community. But it also means that this time we need to double our efforts, and we need to make this even better than we did before. So again, as I said already, like it was a moment of like a burst of happiness for everyone, but now it's back to work. But thankfully in good moods, and in like the atmosphere is great. One thing I miss about the release is that because of COVID and the pandemic, we weren't able to have like this real huge release party that you used to have like 2-3 years ago. I remember our release party for the first one, and it was really like an amazing evening.
Is there anything you're allowed to talk about that you, as a game designer, that you learned from Dying Light 2 that you'll take with you as a life lesson into future games, whether it's DLC or a new IP or whatnot?
Of course, a lot of things. Like it's you kind of caught me off guard. It's kind of hard for me to give you some like a solid example from the top of my head. One thing for sure, like one thing, easy thing for like us, maybe a detail, but something that I have realized is that maybe for the next one, if there is Dying Light 3, we need to start with a character that's already more developed. I think we were maybe a little bit too conservative with our design decisions for the second one, where we started with a character that wasn't much developed compared to the protagonist of the first game, and we asked you to earn some skills that our hardcore players, old school players from the first game were taken for granted. So definitely this is something I would look at, and this is a lesson I have learned with this project. But I also know why we did this. It was made on purpose, because come to think of it, Dying Light as a game in general is actually quite a complex game. It's not something that's easy to explain, and it's not something that's easy for players to get into, especially when you are talking about a game that has such a big reach and reaches players that are casual, that aren't spending that much time on games every week. So we have a very complex game. It's a first-person game with a very complex and sophisticated traversal system, with a very complex and sophisticated combat system. It's not something that can be learned easily. So that's why we decided to give you those skills one by one in time intervals, so you actually have time to learn all of them. But judging by how the community received that, for the next one, definitely we will give you more at the start of the game. But aside from that, like, the whole thing was an experience. We had to learn how to work with our new technologies. So for now, we are way better prepared to handle whatever happens in the future, because now we own the technology already. We have changed the game engine at the start of Dying Light 2, so there was this initial phase where we had to learn how to work with this. We learn how to work with sequels that change so much in the design and the essence of the game, and that add new gameplay pillars to the original experience. So definitely the whole thing was a great learning curve and a learning experience for the whole studio, and me personally as well.
As a game designer, how much input do you have on the narrative of your game? Do you have a lot, a little? Is it your job to make sure that the narrative and the design kind of go hand in hand? Like, are you allowed to change anything?
Actually, yes. So of course I have input over the narrative, but in AAA games, which are so complex and so big and require so much work, you have to split your duties. You have to split your responsibilities. So as a game designer, I'm not directly involved in the creation of the story. What I do is I take part in a lot of different review processes, and if there are decisions or designs or ideas from the narrative team that don't quite fit the game design, then of course, like, it is my duty to explain why it's not working, why it goes against game design, gameplay design, and try to find a solution with the guys responsible for the narrative. Of course, like, it's making games, again, especially games as big as Dying Light 2, is a collaborative process. It's a process which requires a team of people which, like, even if they speak different languages, and when I say that, I mean professional languages, they need to find the common ground, and they need to find common solutions to the problems that arise. So I wasn't directly involved in the narrative. My input was mostly focused on making sure that the different choice and consequences systems that we have work well with the narrative. But we have a great narrative team led by Piotr Szymanek, who's also a writer on some HBO TV series made in Poland. So like he knows story, he knows narrative. So we just had to cooperate to make sure that whatever his team thinks of makes sense with gameplay designs, with the gameplay mechanics, with the gameplay features that we have.
There were so many delays with this game. I think it would be really interesting if you could just talk about like what exactly delayed it. Was it like the co-op issue? Was it like a design flaw? Was it some kind of game-breaking bug? Are you allowed to say? If you're not, it's cool. I'm curious.
So this is, I think we were actually quite open about this. I think that one of the biggest things that helped, of course, there was pandemic that happened. Of course, maybe at some points we were a little bit too optimistic with projecting release dates, but I think the most important reason about which we were open about is the fact that we created a game which is non-linear, not only in terms of the narrative, but also in terms of how the environment, how the city, how the level itself, how the world itself can look. And I think this kind of surprised us how difficult it makes for how difficult it makes the work of QA guys, of testers, of us fixing those bugs when you have an open world which is constantly changing, which has so many different states. That was definitely the biggest challenge, and I think that's the reason why we had to delay the game back in 2000. I think but like on the between 2019 and 2020, after the E3 of 2019, we delayed the game slightly, and we delayed the game, and that was the reason for that was actually the unsuspected amount of work we had to put in to make sure that all of the versions of this world work well with all of the versions of this story.
Oh, and just because I'm curious, I mean, you share a border with Ukraine. Has that conflict impacted development or updates at all with you, or is it pretty much been business as usual?
Like, thankfully, geographically, we are on the other side of Poland. We are on the western border, and all of this is happening close to our eastern border. So I can't say we really feel endangered by what's happening out there, but I think I think the general atmosphere at the studio and in Poland in general is quite grim for the last few weeks. It's like there's an awful conflict going outside, and basically an awful war going outside of our border, quite close to our borders. So it's a topic that everyone talks about, and it's a topic that is on everyone's mind, and it has been like this for the last 40 days. So it really is a tragic moment for the world, and I hope this ends as soon as possible. We try to work as normally, but when there's something like this happening basically outside your window, you always, like, a part of you always keeps thinking about it. So definitely it's not easy for us. Definitely it's like additional burden that we have to live with every day.
And so my last question is, what's next? What's next for Techland and your team? I mean, you're obviously going to continue to support Dying Light 2, more DLCs, a new game. What can you talk about? What's next for you and Techland?
Okay, so as you know, we have announced a crazy plan to support the game for the next 5 years, and we stick to our guns. We stick to what we said, and we have already started making sure that those plans happen quite soon. So we are working on the first 2 DLCs that we have announced. One is like we'll see the light of the day sooner than the other. Both of them are story focused, have parts of narrative. The first one is happening in parallel to the main story, so you don't have to finish the main story to experience the first DLC that we are planning to release. But aside from that, DLCs are an easy thing in a way, because those are huge additions to your game. Paid DLCs, something that, like, the format of it is a format that everyone knows. But we are also working on post-launch support, which most of it will be free for players. So we are constantly releasing new patches with, of course, bug fixes, but also new features. So you can expect the newest one will bring New Game Plus, New Game Plus to the game. We have the plan for the post-launch support quite precisely defined. The first 2 years are like almost like month to month, we know what's going to happen. The third and fourth year are maybe more high level, but we also want to give us that space to see what will work with the community, what will excite gamers most. We know where we want the game to be in 5 years, but like we still allow ourselves to change the vision if the community pushes us in one direction or another. And I think what's especially exciting for me is the first year of the post-launch support, where we try to experiment with different types of formats. So there will be some content made especially for single player sessions. Some will be focusing on co-op online play. Some will be focusing on combat, some on parkour. Some will be like more narrative related. Some will be more focused, or some will be focusing more on pure gameplay without much narrative additions. We just want to try a lot of different things to see what works with the community, what our community really wants. I think we are in a very good position where we have a very direct contact with our community. Sometimes it's hard because it's like a harsh off, and it's not always roses and wine and like smiles all over, but I really do appreciate that we can talk with our community sincerely, and this is also a great source of knowledge for us to make more informed decisions when it comes to steering the game one way or another. So to sum it up, 5 years of support, this is happening. We have a plan of what's going to happen. The first year will be full of surprises, and I don't want to say too much, hoping that actually we will really manage to surprise people. It's designed like that specifically so we can measure what is the most exciting type of content for our community, and we will base whatever happens in the second year, third year, fourth year, and fifth year on the data that we collect and the feedback that we collect this year. So this is roughly it, and the drop that will happen most soon will happen in basically 2 or 3 weeks, and it will bring a new game plus to the game.
So can you talk a little bit about New Game Plus? Like, what's that mode? What will that mode bring to players who own Dying Light 2?
So as I said, I don't want to spoil too much, but this is, of course, you can, like, the basics you can expect. You will get to keep your character progression, your player progression, but you will be able to start the story from scratch with this developed character. So this will open quite a few new opportunities for you. In that mode, you will, we tried to ensure that the level of challenge will be significant for you, so you will not feel completely overpowered with your highly developed skills facing those initial quests, etc. So we will be playing with the enemies that we spawn. You can expect some new types of encounters, new types of maybe not enemies, but some enemy variants with new skills, with new stats, and also with new loot drops. So that will be a chance for you to experience the story once again, see it from the eyes of a developed character, maybe make some different choices and see their outcomes. And we will also allow you to develop your character a little bit more than it was possible in the base game. So when you finish the second playthrough, I think you will know more about different variations and outcomes of the story, but you will also end up with a character that's way more powerful than after the first playthrough.
Now that you've done all this work and for the making this foundation for an ever-evolving world, and you've learned so much in this entire game's 5-6 year development cycle, what will you take with you to your next game, whether it be Dying Light 3 or a completely new game? Like, what was your biggest takeaway from developing this huge game over these past couple of years?
That's a tough one. I think what we learned generally as a studio with Dying Light 2 is to stay consistent and to be confident about your ideas. And when we started working on Dying Light 2, we took assets from the first game and the code from the first game, and we created like you could call it like a maybe half an hour demo of what we want Dying Light 2 to be. We wanted to show this demo to the team internally to explain what we want to achieve, and also to publishers and partners, etc. And I rewatched that video that we did, that demo that we did back then, and compared it to the game that we released. And of course, the demo looks shittier, and it's like half of the mechanics we had to hack back then and weren't actually working. But you can feel that it is the same game that we set out to make. You can feel that it's the vision that we had, but then we managed to pull it off. And we pulled it off because we stayed consistent, because we felt that we know what we're doing. And even if some of those things were crazy, like open world that's changing around you based on your choices, we stick to that. And it allowed us to create this game, which is actually another success for our studio. So I think for the next one, no matter how crazy our ideas will be, we will stick to our ideas and we will feel confident about them. And I think that's something that we will carry on for the next project.